Hi, and welcome to Workshop 7. This is Janice Cookin, and we're going to be going over Demo 24 during this section of the workshop. And we're going to be doing some invariance testing for structural equation modeling. And we're going to be using some of the resources in David Kenny's website, shown here on multiple groups. Now, to run this, to do this particular example, we're going to be doing an analysis using a data set and an example by a man by the name of, his last name is Neff, is James Neff. Race and vulnerability to stress, an examination of differential vulnerability. And in this article, the possibility of race differences in vulnerability to stress is considered, and using structural equation modeling. So the information on the variance covariance matrix and the means and the standard deviations were all taken from this paper. And so that is going to be our example. Now, I'm not going through all of this because that really is would be a course in structural equation modeling. But in this, he goes through and he talks about what this configural model is. And as I mentioned before, that's when there are no differences. You want to show that there are no differences in the structural model, but there might be difference in the factor loadings, or the loadings of each of the indicator variables on the factors. And there are a lot of other invariances you can test, like invariance of the paths, invariance of the intercepts, etc. So Dr. Kenny actually breaks down invariance in much more detail than the 4 levels that I showed you that came from other papers and other materials on invariance. So as a researcher, you want to make sure you can show structural invariance, so you want to have that configural invariance. But how much farther you go from there is you really have to use your judgment and decide what it is you want to show. So here is the example. And here are the variables, and I have these also in the document that with the notes for this particular demo. So we see that we have same model is estimated for 658 whites and 171 blacks. We've got the variables there, y1 through y5 and x1 through x3. So we have 8 variables. These are the 8 indicator variables. And here is the model that we will be looking at. Let me see if I can change this around. There we go. Maybe see it a little bit better. So you can see that the measurement model is such that there are 3 of the indicators load onto the factor called mental health. 2 of them load on the factor called SES, 2 on the factor called stress, and then age is an indicator that's just a single indicator. And the structural models show that age and SES are exogenous, but there is a path here. Age and SES are predictive of stress. Age is also predictive of mental health, and SES is predictive of mental health. All right, so the first thing we want to do is see if these paths or these models are invariant between the black and white. So in order to do that, I'm going to go to the first of our syntax files called Demo 24 Configural, not using command. Now the reason I say that, because there actually is a command that you can use to test a configural model when you haven't provided any covariances or correlations. All right, so this is the Neff example from davidkenny.net. It's testing for multiple group invariances. And so here's our file. It's a summary data set, so we have means, standard deviations, and correlations. And these are the observations. And this tells us that there are 2 groups. And so let me show you real quick what this data file looks like. So we see that we have 2 groups, 658 and 171. White is listed first, so G1 stands for white teachers. Black is listed second, so G2 stands for black teachers. I think it's teachers. May just have been residents of Florida. Actually, I might have that wrong. Anyway, so what do we say? White is first. So these are the mean, standard deviations, and the covariance matrix for white, and that is for black. And it actually took me a little while to set this up. As I mentioned before, you know, it takes a little while sometimes to set up the data set and get the data to read in accurately. Trying to provide this to you so you don't have to do that, but don't be surprised if it doesn't work on your first try. All right then, so I have this grouping, so where I have race, and the first group to come in is race is equal to 1 is G1. So actually G1 stands for the very first group listed, and that will be a default value. And so I'm calling it race 1 equals G1 and 2 equals G2. So the most important thing to realize is that this G1, and you're going to have the first one and the second one, and I'm calling them G1 and G2. All right. So here's my model. I have, we saw, SES is the factor, and so this is a sort of the confirmatory factor analysis, or the measurement model here. I am indicating which variables I want as the marker variables. The marker variables, remember, we have to define a metric some way, and this way I know for sure what's the marker variable for each one of these. Generally speaking, the way I would set it up, they would be the marker variable anyway, because the first indicator variable listed in the by statement is the marker variable. Then I also have some these correlations listed here. And this is just a reminder that although the brackets tell Mplus to estimate the factor means, so that's what these are right here, Mplus does not actually do this when using the grouping variable. So one of the frustrations is that Mplus doesn't always do what you want it to do. And there's something about using the grouping variable that results in not being able to estimate the factor means. So it estimates the means for one of the groups and constrains them to 0 for the other group. All right, so then I want my marker variables to be set at 0, and this tells also to estimate the intercepts for all those variables. Okay, so then I have a similar setup, but because I don't remember in the last example I had something like, like B1 here in parentheses, and then I had it the same in the other model. We're not doing that this time because I want each of these factor loadings to be different, except for the marker variables. But they're all loading on the same factors. They're all set up the same. The model is set up the same in every other way. All right, so now I'm going to run this. Oh, there we go. Okay. So just let me see if I can get through this so we can see where the chi-square test is. And just so you can see, this is group G1 and SES by, so it's 1.0 and 0.104. Here's G2. See, they're different. The marker variable is the same, but the loading for the other one is different. So we can see that these two groupings have the same measurement structure. So they call it the configural model, but they don't have the same loadings. So this would make this just the configural model. All right, so now I'm going to open up the second one, which would constrain these to have equal loadings. And that's called Demo 24 equal loadings. All right, there it is. So now let's look at it. So now you can see, all right, so I have these marker variables the same, but now I have the number in parentheses. And it doesn't really matter what you use there. I'm just trying different things to show it to you. But that means that these loadings, this is the value 1, 2, and 3. Excuse me. And then when I go down to model G2, I have 1, 2, and 3 there as well. They are the same in all other ways except for there. All right, so now I'm going to run this. And let's just take a look at the results here. And here I have 1 and 0.116. And let's 1 and 0.116. 1, 0.909, 0.962. Same thing here. So the factor loadings are the same. The marker indicators are the same, but everything else is different. So which is the right one? So we're actually wanting to be sure that we have invariance. So I'm going to look at the comparison of the configural model with the equal loadings model. So I'm going to pause it just a second, set up. So here I can see that we have the configural model and the equal loadings model. I'm going to do the chi-square difference test. So I pick these up off the models of the output from each of those, running those syntax. There's the difference in chi-squares, the difference in degrees of freedom. And the equal loadings model is statistically significantly different. That means, again, change is significant, so this time we prefer the more complex model. Which is the more complex model? It's the one with more parameters, which means it's lower degrees of freedom. So in this case, the configural model fits better than the equal loadings model. Now I want to go and look at the equal paths model. Everything is the same as the equal loadings model, but I also am putting some values on in the parentheses to say that these are fixed values, and they are, well, I don't mean they're fixed, but they are fixed between the two models. So this this path is the same, the path regression coefficient is the same between the two models. And that's the constraint that I'm putting on this particular model. So it's the equal paths, and this is the equal paths model. All right, so here we go. So let's just look and see what this looks like. And we can see, let's see, so here's some paths. All right, MH on mental health, on SES and stress, 043 and 127. It's down here, 043 and 127. So you can see this is telling us that we have equal loadings and equal paths. So now let's look at this third example, demo 24 equal paths, and I'm actually going to compare it to the configural model since that's the better fitting model that we have so far. So once I do that, I take the difference in the chi-squares, the difference in the degrees of freedom, and I see that it is not significant. So the equal loadings model is not statistically significantly different, but it has more degrees of freedom. So we prefer the equal paths model. So again, little note, sort of the cheat sheet is over here. The change is not significant, so we prefer the simpler model. The simpler model has more degrees of freedom. And so that is the example of how to do an invariance test on a structural equation model using Dave Kenny's example. One caveat is that the results are a little bit different than what he is showing because when you run it in Mplus, it's hard to do it exactly the same as in Amos. One of the things to look at is just here, if you're curious, this kind of describes the parameters. I did an analysis of identification to help me to be able to figure out the two. So that is in the Workshop 7 Model Fit Comparison Excel spreadsheet. So that's it for Demo 24. And we'll go on to Demo 25 next. Thank you.